Okay, so now without further ado, for our next presentation, we have Sabreen Sid. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. That is going to present to us today Hayyan's theory of artificial life and its complications for contemporary philosophy and history of AI and genetic engineering. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Firstly, I'd really like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I'm very honored and privileged to be here speaking to you. I would have loved to be there in the beautiful Mexico City, but this time it's going to be online. So thank you. So I'm going to start now. I'm going to be discussing, this is a very interesting subject and extremely unconventional for people who are interested in the Islamic scientific tradition and in the history of science in general. So this is Jabir bin Hayyan's theory of artificial life and its implications for contemporary philosophy and history of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. So we're going to talk about a very, a very unconventional, even controversial idea that came up in the medieval period, in the early years of the Islamic Golden Age. Many people are not aware of that, but I think it's extremely important that we discuss it, especially in our times. So the agenda is going to be that I'll just introduce who Jabir bin Hayyan was as a scientist and his theory of balance. I'm going to talk about a little bit about his theory of balance. That's very important because that's his entire philosophical framework on which he builds his theory of artificial life. So we need to understand how he viewed the universe in order to understand how he then came to the conclusion that human beings can actually create life in a laboratory environment. So his theory of artificial life is called Takwin. So it's from the Arabic word kaun, and kaun means to exist, to be. So Takwin is the process of coming into existence. Now, also then we're going to move into the implications for the study of AI and genetic engineering. So now we have this medieval view of the generation of artificial life, but then what are its implications? Because it's really a philosophy more than science, but then what are the implications of such a view on the history of AI and genetic engineering, and also for the philosophy of AI and genetic engineering? Because we'll have to have a sort of a revisionism of the way we view the history of science and also even the philosophy of AI when we come to understand this theory of Takwin. So, introducing Jabir bin Hayyan, he is the founder of experimental chemistry. He's an extremely important figure in the history of chemistry in specific and the history of science in general. So he laid the foundations of experimental chemistry, and one of his famous sayings is that the first essential in chemistry is that you should perform practical work and conduct experiments. So this was his contribution to this field, that without experimentation you don't really have science and you just have some sort of a pseudoscience. So that has been recognized by the historian and philosopher Will Durant when he says that chemistry as a science was almost created by the Muslims, where the Greeks were confined to industrial experience and vague hypotheses. The Muslims introduced precise observation, controlled experiment, and careful records. So this is very important because we do have the idea of the alchemical tradition, which was a very mysterious, mystical tradition that has existed since ancient times. So the contribution of Jabir bin Hayyan in particular was that he brought in a very rigorous experimental method to that. So according to Homyard, who is one of the leading scholars, very important scholars of Jabir bin Hayyan, he says one of the fundamental aspects Jabir brought forward was the development of the practical side of chemistry, so performing experiments. experiments. And he produced a vast body of work. It's been attributed to Jabir, more than 3,000 treatises. So obviously that has posed a lot of problems for the historians and the historians of science, especially Jabir bin Hayyan, that how can one human being write 3,000 treatises? So there is a lot of debate over that, whether he produced all of them, were they all books or maybe parts of the same book, multiple parts of similar books. So, but the fact remains that as Paul Krauss, who is also a well-known scholar of Jabir bin Hayyan, he says no alchemical work of Islam reveals such vast knowledge of ancient literature or has such an encyclopedic character than Jabir's work. So Jabir bin Hayyan literally created an encyclopedia of experimental chemistry and related subjects. So moving on, just to get a bit familiar with Jabir bin Hayyan and how he actually impacts our world even today, is that one of his important contributions is the perfection of the process of distillation and its equipment, which has been more or less the same that is used today to distill out petrol, diesel, kerosene. Now, this is the backbone of the global world, but the backbone of the global world obviously is based on a very scientific process, that is the distillation of crude petroleum. So Jabir bin Hayyan actually contributed to the perfection of the equipment, and more or less the kind of equipment we use today in our refineries and our oil fields throughout the world is almost the same as what Jabir bin Hayyan had created in his small laboratory in Iraq. His primary teacher was the famous Muslim spiritual figure, the sixth great grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Jafar as-Sadiq, and there are hundreds of references to him, to Jafar as-Sadiq, in Jabir's work. Now, this is very important for scholars of religion and science and scholars of the history of science in general, that Jabir bin Hayyan was not just a regular scientist, he was a spiritual figure related to a very important spiritual personality from the Muslim world. And moving on, Jabir is credited with the use of over 20 types of now basic chemical laboratory equipment, such as the alembic and the retort. So all of the, equipment that we use in our chemistry labs, even in school, and if some of you would have actually taken chemistry as higher education subject, most of the equipments that we have, they do find their origin or their perfection with Jabir bin Hayyan. And even processes, chemical processes, now in modern chemistry that we know, that includes sublimation, liquefaction, purification, oxidation, crystallization, distillation, as we talked about, all of this, the synthesis of acids and other kinds of compounds, salts, and all of this, these chemical procedures as well as the synthesis of chemical substances, they are found in his encyclopedic work. He talks in great detail about these things, and he used to produce much of what we now know today as important chemical substances. So moving on, I really want to talk about this one particular thing so that we understand that the experimental character of Jabir bin Hayyan's science. So he defines chemical combinations as a union of the elements in minute particles too small for the naked eye to see, and yet not suffering from a loss of character. So he's basically laying down the foundations of chemical atomism. But Jabir bin Hayyan his atomism is it is different from Democritus and Leucippus. So this is not the same atomism, because this is more, he does not consider these atoms to be the fundamental building blocks of the universe. So, but he does say that at the chemical level, when we find interactions between chemicals and compounds, that happens at a very minute level. So the atomic theory of corpuscularianism, where all bodies are made up of minute particles, origins in Jabir's work. This theory was a dominant theory and even used by Isaac Newton in the 17th century. So for people familiar with Newton's work, one of his greatest contributions was his theory of the corpuscular particles of light. So that's where it's coming from. That's where it's this idea of fundamental sort of particles forming the universe. That was the corpuscular theory, and Newton used it to develop his theory of light, whereas Boyle used it to develop his mechanical corpuscular philosophy. Now, Boyle is very important. He's quite literally the founder of modern chemistry, and this is his distinguishing contribution, that he actually introduced chemical atomism. But what we find is John Dalton also, just like Boyle, is a very important figure in modern chemistry. But what we find is Jabir bin Hayyan is one of the Muslim scientists who was widely known in Europe as Geber. So it isn't far-fetched at all that these people were actually very well aware of Geber's or Jabir bin Hayyan's work and his ideas on chemical atomism. Now, moving on, because we don't want to study Jabir bin Hayyan's work on chemistry. That's not what's the topic. We want to study his idea of artificial life. So I really want to take you through the first premise. What does he base his theory of life, artificial life, on? That's his theory of balance. So we need to understand the first premise, then only would we actually be able to understand how he gets to artificial life. So he says, Jabir bin Hayyan, he says, all things fall under the principle of balance. And it is by means of this principle that man is able to make sense of the world. And it is this theory of balance that is the foundation upon which Jabir constructs his whole system. So for him, everything in the physical universe has this sort of a very strong balance, this equilibrium. And it is only because of this equilibrium that human beings can actually make sense of the universe. It's a very famous saying of Albert Einstein. He said that one of the most incomprehensible things about the universe is that it is comprehensible. How do we actually understand the universe? So this is how Jabir actually understands the universe, that there is this balance, and because of this balance, because we see this balance everywhere, human beings can actually understand the universe. And he says that this was the way through which one understood, made sense of, and above all measured and manipulated the objects and the processes of the universe. So he submits all physical processes that take place in the universe to the exactness of mathematical laws and calls it the supreme principle, Qaida Uzma, that he calls, of the world which governs everything. So in simple terms, what he's trying to say is that the universe is ruled, is governed by very exact mathematical laws that manifest themselves in an extremely, extremely balanced equilibrium. And that's how human beings actually then understand the world and even manipulate it in terms of producing science and technology. Right. So, and this balance, he says, is everywhere. It's in the celestial bodies and even in the things that we find in the world. Everywhere. So, okay, now we understand his theory of balance. That's what he's trying to say, that the world has this theory of everything, as Stephen Hawking would like to say that there's this balance and this uniformity of nature that we find everywhere, and the human beings can actually make sense of it. So what's the next step? Then he proposes his next step, which is that as time progresses and humans attain increased control and knowledge of this cosmic balance and this precise quantitative structure of the universe, this will allow them to synthetically create things that are naturally found in the world, from inanimate minerals or objects to animate life, leading up to the artificial creation of human life. So that's what he's saying, that because there's this balance, and the human beings actually try to understand the universe through this balance, and as time progresses, knowledge increases, science increases, the human beings will actually be able to manipulate this balance to such an extent that they'll start creating what nature creates naturally. So, from objects, inanimate objects, to animate life, let's say animals and plants, to then leading up to even the creation of artificial life, like human beings, intelligent beings. That's what he says in his Kutub al Mawazin and Kitab al Tajmi', those are his books. And then moving on to that, let's go over what the implications then are. Much of Jabir's scientific studies were dedicated to pursuing the possibility of Takwin, the artificial creation of life. His Book of Stones, Kitab al-Ahjar, contains procedures purportedly capable of creating scorpions, snakes, and even humans in the right laboratory environment. So this is extremely important because this is not a passing idea of Jabir bin Hayyan. He actually concentrated much on this, and he wrote extensively on how this is a future possibility. And in his Minor Balance, he writes there are two sorts of creation, a first and a second. The first is divine creation. He says how everything else was created, everything in the world was created with a divine action. But he says the second kind of creation is represented by imitation and resembles the first. This is human creation. So we start actually replicating what was before, what was created divinely. And what is the difference between the divine creation and the artificial creation, he says? He says in the former case, which is divine creation, the creation is instantaneous, whereas in the latter, it takes place after a period of time. So it may take centuries, even millennia, for human beings to actually replicate what was already, present before. Now, moving on to actual contemporary study of artificial intelligence, how our universities and institutions actually study the history of artificial intelligence. We actually start quite randomly from 1943. From the 1940s, the development of computation, programmable devices. Alan Turing is a very important name. Then John McCarthy is a very important name. And moving on, how the first computer was created, and then the more sophisticated machine learning, and now we're in this phase of deep learning, and a lot, maybe even quantum computing in a few years. But essentially, if we want a sort of a balanced view of the history of science, we have to include the people who actually crafted the idea of producing intelligent life, of producing human-like intelligence. And in that sense, Jabir bin Hayyan is a central figure. Jabir bin Hayyan occupies a very important place in that, and even his European proponents. It's very important to note that only after Jabir bin Hayyan became a very popular figure in Europe and in the Muslim world that we actually found many European scientists and alchemists of that time, chemists of that time, starting to talk about the possibility of creating artificial life. And with the same, in the same way, we can even talk about genetic engineering and its history, and synthetic biology in general. So we have take any book on the history of genetic engineering or synthetic biology in general. There is a very haphazard view of the growth of genetic of the science of genetic engineering. They start with pre-recorded history, how artificial selection started, with the nomadic tribes, and then the oldest evidence of artificially selected crops. And then suddenly there's a big jump from before Christ era to 1973. So nothing could be more unbelievable than this, the big jump, and what happened in the time between this era. There were so many different civilizations, and they must have contributed in so many different ways. So this is the kind of the incomplete and truncated view of the history of science that most of our textbooks and our reference books have. And then, they start from 1973 onwards. That's when they start talking about the growth of genetic engineering. But there are contributions of scientists, even if they didn't produce anything. But the idea, the creation of the idea is much more important than the creation of the actual technology. Now, what are the implications for the history of AI and genetic engineering when we talk about Jabir bin Hayyan's theory? And what are the implications now? How can we reform or revise the history of science in a way after studying the theory of Takwin of Jabir bin Hayyan? I would say the study of Jabir bin Hayyan's theory of artificial life creation, which is Takwin, will inevitably reform the dominant global north-centric history of science. So there needs to be this sort of reformation and even a revision of how the history of science as a discipline is taught, and the way it is more dominantly focused on the global north and its mostly the Euro-American contributions to science. They are important, obviously they are, but then there are other civilizations from Latin America, from the Islamic civilization, the Indian and the Chinese, that have to be necessarily included in the history of science. The view that cutting-edge technologies like AI and genetic engineering are emergent accidents of the Eurocentric scientific community is an incomplete and biased view of the history of science. So just like we saw with genetic engineering, they start with before Christ era and then jump to 1973. So these are extremely inconsistent and even to an extent even biased views on that exist in the history of science, and they are Eurocentric in nature. And there is a critical need of representing the production of science as a global collaborative effort instead of presenting it as a product of a single race or a civilization. Because science is a form of knowledge, and knowledge can only progress not in a concentrated manner in one particular civilization, one particular locality or geographic location. Knowledge essentially is a human endeavor. So there, it is a collaborative effort between civilizations. And what are the implications then for the philosophy of artificial intelligence? So we talked about the history, the need for the revisionism and the reformation, but what about the philosophy of artificial intelligence? And there's so many factors, there's so many discussions that come under the philosophy of artificial intelligence, but I'm just going to take three of those because I don't think all of those are relevant here as of now, at least according to me. So the three core areas of the philosophy of AI include, number one, this sort of this discussion around the paranoia around AI and its sudden emergence in the world history. So this idea of this, there's been a lot of discussion, be it in academic circles or even in popular media, even figures as important as Elon Musk and Sam Altman and these people, they have expressed their concerns regarding AI and its growth. And the picture that is given is it as if this technology suddenly emerged in world history out of nowhere, and now it's posing a threat to human survival. The other is the possibility of an AI takeover of the human race. This is the next possibility, the next paranoia that's very much connected to the first one, that what if AI takes over and that's the end of the human race? Even somebody as formidable as Stephen Hawking talked about this. And the third one I've mentioned here is the ethics, obviously, related to the possibility of abuse or misuse of these technologies. So we know about how robots are being used for war and for the threat of bioterrorism, and all of these things are real. So how can we use the theory of Takwin to actually maybe discuss these areas? I would say, and this is my view of regarding this, that the paranoia around AI and its sudden emergence in the world, in world history, if I were to think deeply about the theory of Takwin and how it's presented by its proponent, Jabir bin Hayyan. He presents the theory of Takwin presents the creation of artificial life in a laboratory environment as an inevitability of scientific progress. So it's not a sudden emergence in world history, it's an inevitability of scientific progress. It's not a sudden accidental emergence, but a slow and sure future possibility. As in science, in its nature, grows because it's human knowledge and human beings want to know more and more. And as time progresses, we would reach a time where we would want to, we will reach a point where we can have a greater control and manipulation of our environment in a case where we are actually even creating life. We're creating artificial life. And the next one is the possibility of an AI takeover of the human race. I would say Jabir's theory of Takwin rationally grounds the possibility of artificial life in the theory of Mizan. So what he does is he understands Takwin or artificial life to be a logical progression of Mizan. There is balance in the universe. Human beings will learn about this balance and will be able to manipulate this balance. Therefore, in time, they will start producing, uh, you know, uh, the things that were produced by the universe. So in future, as humans attain more knowledge of the physical world, they will be they will be able to use this balance to recreate living beings. For him, the second creation is contingent on the first creation. He states that the artificial life will be subject to humans. The emergent cannot supersede the source. So he gives us a sort of a view that the artificial life that has been created is basically the emergent from the source. And the emergent is only there because the source is a much higher a much higher being or a much higher intelligence that can actually create and replicate its own self. So there's no way that the emergent will take over the source. So that's his view, and that can be used and that can be discussed. And the ethics related to the possibility of abuse and misuse of these technologies, I would say both Jabir bin Hayyan and his teacher Jafar as-Sadiq express concern over this knowledge being misused by the unworthy. And it's very important that they actually talk about this idea of this knowledge being reserved only for the people of good character. They actually discuss that this knowledge should not be made public, for it has that possibility of being misused and it has that danger. I mean, just imagine 1,000 years back, these discussions are being taking place, wherein they are actually very concerned about what if this kind of knowledge actually goes into the hands of people who may misuse it. So these are the implications for the philosophy of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. There's three, places, sort of topics of discussion. There can be more, and I've just taken these three. And I will leave you with this a thought, a food for thought, that the past has great lessons to offer for those who care to listen, and there's so much to learn from our immediate past, that is the medieval ages. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Sabreen, can you hear me now? Yeah, I believe. Okay, thank you. Any questions in English, Spanish? We can translate it. Sabreen, we are going to give you a question in Spanish and I will translate it. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Primero, un gusto. Mi pregunta va más allá con respecto a hasta qué punto el científico que realiza inteligencia artificial es responsable de lo que se haga con la tecnología que desarrolla.
Okay, Sabreen Sarai mentions first that it is a great pleasure to meet you. And the second, that it is a question, she's asking at what point the scientist that develops this AI is responsible of how it is used.
Right. Thank you so much for the question. Uh, in the philosophy of technology, we have a very important topic, which is the neutrality thesis. They say that technology in particular, all technology in general actually, is neutral. And so it's only the human beings and how they use it, how they, just like a knife, the use of it actually depends on the user. So, but now, with AI, there have been many discussions about that the neutrality thesis does not work for AI. That we have applications that are being used right now in countries, war zones especially, where AI is being used for war activities as an experiment on human beings. Those are, the use of killer robots. So obviously, what Jabir bin Hayyan and his teacher feared, that's what has come, that's what has happened in the world, that this very strong technology, very powerful technology is in hands that are unworthy, and they are not using it for the benefit that could have been brought through that. So it has to be this idea. That's why many a times in academia they do give courses on ethics of technology, and along with teaching technology. But we do find that most of the time the people who are discussing the ethics are different, and the people who are producing the technology are different. So it has to be simultaneous. It has to be the people who are creating technology, firstly, have to be trained into the ethics. They have to know the kind of damage or benefit they would do if the technology goes right or wrong, if that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Anyone else has another question? ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Thank you. I'm going here to the camera so you can see me. Thank you, Sabreen, for this wonderful talk. And I got very intrigued by the fact of this atomism thought from Hayyan, because whereas you are talking about artificial life, it comes to my mind also the saying of Paul North that with the cell theory, the living found its atom. So I wonder maybe if is there some hint of the work of Ibn Hayyan speaking about kind of what is the atom of the living. Maybe he didn't found cells. I don't know. Some microscopes might be already magnifying lenses might be available to that time. And the second part is, do you know if he had some influences into plasmogenic theory afterwards? Because plasmogenic is much kind of imitation of organic forms from nature.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, very interesting questions actually. The idea of atomism in Jabir bin Hayyan's work is actually, as far as he talks about in the specific context of chemistry. So this the actual word, the right word to be used would be corpuscular, just the way Newton used it. We do call it atomism as well, because that's what Robert Boyle and John Dalton then used. But it's only in the context of chemistry. When it comes to cell and microorganisms, I couldn't find anything of that in his work. However, there are other Muslim scientists, and some work has been written on how Ibn Sina, who was well known as Avicenna in Europe, he talked about microorganisms being carriers of disease. But did he observe them? I doubt. Even though you're right that there did exist, magnifying glasses and even a lot of different kind of lenses around 10th century, if not in Jabir bin Hayyan's time, but in 10th century they did. But I don't think so there would be an observation of that sort. But there was discussion of that sort, not in Jabir bin Hayyan's work, but in other people's work. The other question, I don't think so. That could be applied on this as far as I'm aware. I don't think so, because what he is talking about is essentially just, it's a philosophy. It's more of a philosophy because there's no proof that he actually produced anything living. He did not. He said that if human progress works and functions in this way, it will be a future possibility. So he gave out a futuristic possibility, just like how we find in, we have the futuristic scientists from Silicon Valley, Ray Kurzweil, talking about transhumanism. So he's a futuristic scientist. He didn't really produce anything of that sort, as far as I'm aware. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, another question.
No, I can go there. Yes. Thank you very much, Sabreen, for this very interesting talk. He lived in a very interesting era for Arab science, and there were other branches of science that were developing in an important way. Do you know if there was any connection between these different scientists, what we now call the chemists, physicists, people who worked on, especially on optics, the theory of light, etc. Did they come together? Was there any exchange of knowledge or let's say interaction or collaboration even among them? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a very good question, and that's a very relevant question. And throughout, not only in Jabir bin Hayyan's work, but throughout Islamic science, you find an integration of knowledge. So Jabir bin Hayyan, even though mostly he was concerned with chemistry, but he was also, known for his work in medicine, in pharmacology of that time, and he even wrote a little bit on astronomy. So that time, I would say the formative years of the Islamic scientific tradition actually saw a kind of an integrated approach to knowledge. The way we have right now is like separate departments and this sort of compartmentalization of science and of other disciplines. But in the Islamic Golden Age, there was this principle of unification of knowledge, and they believed that all knowledge is unified. And therefore, they studied, they didn't have a problem in the overlap of sciences, and people could be biologists and religious scholars as well as physicists, and many were astronomers as well as biologists. So which we don't find in today's world. So it existed there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any last question? Okay. Give me just 1 minute, Sabreen.
Bueno, hola. Mi pregunta es, bueno, mencionó que tanto él como su tutor tenían eh, como una enseñanza espiritual muy importante, ¿no? Entonces, ¿en algún momento tuvo algún dilema como ético, religioso, siguiendo esta línea de encontrar la vida y la diferencia entre la creación, primera creación y lo que nosotros imitamos? Y la segunda parte sería si entonces él pensaba que aspiramos justamente a poder imitar la creación divina.
Okay, so it is a two-question part. The first part is that Hayabs and his tutor had this spiritual background. And the first question she asked is how, if at a specific point they have a spiritual dilemma or ethic dilemma by having this spiritual background and their scientific part. That is the first question. And the second one would be if you think we are aspiring to imitate the divine creation by doing this artificial life.
Okay, thank you so much for that. You'll have to repeat the second one. That wasn't very clear, but let me just go with the first one first. That's a very important observation there, and I've worked much on that because it's a very interesting period of history, and you find, like I said before, there's a lot of overlap between religion and science. So much so that I made a point that I mentioned that this person in particular, Jabir bin Hayyan, he was a mystic. He was very religious. And throughout his work, he actually says very interesting things that before you actually conduct like an experiment in chemistry, it's good for you to actually, have a religious ritual done. So that will purify your soul and that will give you success. So, and that is not just Jabir bin Hayyan. You see that all across the board when it comes to the medieval Muslim scientists, and even I would say the medieval Christian scientists from Europe. You find that sort of a very religious nature to their science, that they did understand that the work of science is a understanding of the divine hand and the divine creation. So that brings a human being close to divine providence. So that's one thing, and it's throughout. And you'll see, just the way we have today, religion and science is presented, at least in popular culture, as a sort of at odds with each other. But you don't find that in the medieval period, especially in Islam. Especially in Islam, there were some sort of controversies in the Christian world in Europe, but especially in Islam, you have this sort of a combination of religion and science, and there was no. I can't say no because obviously there is this tension, but comparatively, the Islamic civilization was very open to this overlap between religion and science. And the other question, if you can repeat that again, please.
Yes. The second question is if you believe at a specific point he tried to imitate this divine creation by doing this artificial life study.
Yeah, that's an important question because many a times when I actually speak about this, many people, especially religious people, they are of the opinion that if he's a religious figure, why is he doing that? Why is he actually replicating life? Because we are thinking from our own perspective. When we listen to scientists of our age, the futuristic scientists of Silicon Valley, what they're trying to actually create is a kind of a transhumanist God. And they do talk about, there's no need for the divine when you can actually take all power. You are now creating life on your own. And these discussions are usually, found in religion and science debates. Whereas for Jabir bin Hayyan, what is very striking about his contribution and his work, on, especially on Takwin, he says that the higher you progress in scientific activity, the closer you get to God. And then he uses the Islamic principle of there's this principle in Islam that be as God, تخلقوا بأخلاق الله, as it says in the hadith, as in get the attributes of God in you. So God is generous, you be generous. God is merciful, you be merciful. And God is just, you be just. And so he thinks of this this attribute of creation as being a part of his spiritual duty. So he doesn't see it as competing with God, because he openly writes that this kind of creation will never be the first creation. It's these are two types of creation. This will be always contingent on that, but yes, it's going to be powerful, and it's going to be subject to human control, and it's going to be like humans. But not in the sense that we hear nowadays in atheistic circles. Thank you.
Okay, I believe with that we are ready to go. Let's give Sabreen one last round of applause. Really, thank you so much, Sabreen, for connecting with us.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you soon in Mexico City.
Thank you so
Thank
much. Thanks a lot.
Well, with this talk, we close the first session of our symposium, and we will meet again here at 3 p.m. for the next sessions. For our international guests, please let's gather here so we can orient you to the lunch that the